This video is part of the Garden of Forking Paths project funded by the AHRC. Today we're looking at clarinet registers and how we can expand writing for the clarinet in a way that avoids the dichotomy between monophonic and multiphonic fingerings. So to begin with, we're treating the clarinet as having three registers, which is commonly understood. The chalumeau register, which is the E3 up to A#4, these are the fundamental pitches of the instrument. The clarino register, which is from B4 to C6. These are the same fingerings as the chalumeau, but with the register key added, which overblows them a 12th higher. And the altissimo register, which is everything from C#6 upwards. How far upwards depends on the player, but G6 to C7 is normal for soloists. The fingerings in this register don't follow any particular pattern. This project approaches clarinet writing with a few principles that should be helpful. Firstly, practically all clarinet fingerings can produce several different pitches across all of these registers. But each fingering has one resonance which is strongest, which defines the register associated with that fingering. So, for example, the G3 pitch in the chalumeau register, its strongest resonance is that G3, but other pitches are possible, as we'll see. Clarinet players use embouchure techniques of overblowing and underblowing to access secondary resonances in other registers. For example, the next strongest resonances are usually harmonics that can be reached by overblowing, while underblowing suppresses the higher register resonances in favour of lower registers, usually flattening the upper pitches in the process. All fingerings are capable of multiphonic sounds, since these are a product of careful manipulation of embouchure technique, not a property of fingerings themselves. The reason that we have special fingerings for multiphonics are cases where the multiphonic is especially predictable and repeatable, while multiphonics on other fingerings are sometimes less stable. Multiphonics occur when a fingering has more than one strong resonances, or that its strongest resonances are relatively close to each other. In this case, a player can balance these resonances simultaneously, which may also cause the resonance to mode lock, which generates the additional complex interference tones and sounds like a fused timbre, characteristic of multiphonic sounds. Key points to keep in mind as we look at the three registers is what are the primary and secondary resonances in those registers, and what techniques the player can use to access other registers as monophonic or multiphonic sounds. The chalumeau register is the lowest register of the instrument. In the low end of this register, there's only a single fingering possible for each chromatic pitch. As you go up the register, there are possibilities to use alternate fingerings, but these often drastically alter the timbre, and, for our purposes, open up interesting possibilities for multiphonics, but more of that in a later video. By overblowing in this register, the player can reach harmonics, beginning with the third partial and extending up to the sixth partial, and higher is also sometimes possible, but they get very fragile up there. Note also that clarinet harmonics are quite out of tune. They don't adhere to the natural harmonic series when they're isolated in this way. Note also that the fingering here doesn't change, it's still the same G3 fingering in this example. Harmonics are all accessed with embouchure technique. Overblowing in this register also allows two types of multiphonic. It's possible to blend isolated harmonics with the fundamental, though this mostly has to be at a low dynamic and they're tricky to stabilize, so quick playing is not possible. Additionally, this gets harder as you go up, and often the fundamental disappears if you're trying to isolate very high harmonics. See Heather Roche's blog post for more examples and tips on this. It's also possible to do a spectral multiphonic, which is a usually loud and raucous, distorted fusing of the partials. The partials aren't isolated in this case, but it's usually possible to focus on one partial in a filtering kind of way, so it stands out from the timbre. Spectral multiphonics work best to lower in the register and are easier to manipulate. Again, see Heather's blog for examples. The clarino register uses the register key to vent and stabilize an overblowing of the chalumeau register's third partials. So all of the fingerings in the chalumeau, when you add the register key, produce a pitch a 12th higher. This also requires a small embouchure change to stabilize the higher pitch, which can be reversed, as we'll see in a moment, with useful consequences. You see the fingering here is the same as the chalumeau G3, but with the register key added. Overblowing further produces the same harmonics as would be available in the chalumeau register, sometimes with very slight tuning and timbre changes. Again, similar to the chalumeau, it's possible to produce a multiphonic that sustains these harmonics against the third partial, since with the register key down, the strong resonance is the third partial and not the fundamental. And the same restrictions apply as in the chalumeau. The higher up you go, the more fragile this gets. Spectral multiphonics in the clarino register are possible, but much less effective than in the chalumeau. Now that we're above the fundamental register of the instrument, supported by the register key's artificial overblow, we also have the possibility of underblowing. Clarino register pitches, when underblown, produce a multiphonic with an additional altered chalumeau register pitch, not simply a 12th lower, because the addition of the register key sharpens that fundamental by several semitones. The precise amount depends on tube length. These multiphonics are predictable, aside from the minor tuning deviations that are normal with multiphonics. See Heather's blog for a chart listing the different fingerings and underblows. Note that these work best in the middle of the clarino register. Since the strong resonance is the clarino pitch, at the extreme ends of the register this can completely overpower the underblown pitch, which, even in the best cases, tends to be quieter and less present than the clarino pitch. Note also that the act of underblowing tends to flatten the clarino pitch noticeably, up to a semitone in some cases, but usually more like a quarter tone. The altissimo register is where things really start to get flexible. The fingerings up here are no longer predictable, and there's a wide range of alternative fingerings that offer variations in intonation and timbre, and many multiphonic possibilities. Some pitches in the altissimo register have more than 20 stable alternative fingerings. See woodwind.org for examples. Altissimo fingerings have their strongest resonance in this register and can be underblown to reach both chalumeau and clarino pitches, either as single pitches or as multiphonics. Be careful though, because fingerings have different behaviours and the same rules don't apply equally. Here's some general observations. In this register, isolated altissimo pitches are always possible, because these fingerings are designed to do that. Isolated chalumeau pitches are almost always possible, though they're often quiet and sometimes hard to disentangle from clarino pitches. This can happen especially with dyad multiphonics. Isolated clarino pitches are often possible, but not in all cases. In many cases, the clarino pitch can only be accessed as part of a multiphonic, or they can be isolated, but only as extremely quiet sounds. For multiphonics, it's possible to link chalumeau and altissimo in most cases, although Heather has a blog post about the 9 fingerings we found which only overblow from the clarino, which is quite unusual. Multiphonics between chalumeau and clarino are also quite possible. This is fairly normal, and then they can often be overblown up to altissimo pitches as well. Multiphonics that contain all 3 registers can be done, but this is very variable and very variable in dynamic, some requiring great loudness in order to achieve this. Sometimes it can only be done very quietly, sometimes it can't be done at all. It can also be possible to further overblow to isolate secondary resonances above the altissimo pitch, usually very quiet, which can sometimes also be multiphonics aligned with lower components, more usually the clarino in my experience, but it's very variable. That's some general observations. Looking at the specific examples I've included here, these 3 display 2 very similar behaviours and one slightly different. All of these are alternative fingerings of D6, which I got from woodwind.org. You can see the first and third are quite similar fingerings. They're basically just microtonal variations of each other. Both of these allow isolated chalumeau and altissimo pitches, but the clarino is most easily reached by overblowing from the chalumeau pitch. There are, of course, many more examples of fingerings in the altissimo register. As I said before, check woodwind.org for examples. We also see the Garden of Forking Path project blog, where we look specifically at when we took, I think, 12 different examples of the G6 altissimo pitch and what multiphonic possibilities we could get from those. I hope this video helps you to understand what flexibilities are available across these registers when dealing with what are normatively considered as monophonic fingerings. You can see the possibilities for expanding any fingering into different registers, and the powerful effect of underblowing and overblowing to both connect and move between the different resonances of any given fingering. Future videos will look at other fingerings with different kinds of stabilities and instabilities and allow us to explore